Thanks everyone for joining us. Good morning to you all. My name is Stephanie Kim and I'm the Director of Government and Nonprofit Programs at CommunityConnect Labs. We're a nonprofit working on census outreach, and we wanted to take this time to just share with you all a little bit about what we're learning about the role of libraries in ensuring a complete count, and then also share with you about some tools and resources that we have developed to support that work. And then lastly, definitely answer questions that you might have. I know a number of you had submitted questions when you signed up for this webinar, and we want to be a resource where we can. So thanks again for joining us, and we're really looking forward to this discussion. So a little bit about us. We are a nonprofit. We're based in Redwood City, California, and we have developed a mobile messaging solution that helps government and other nonprofit or community-based organizations better reach and engage these traditionally hard-to-reach communities. So thinking about traditionally marginalized, disenfranchised, low-income, immigrant, minority groups, all of these groups, we're thinking about how to best reach them, knowing that they're often disconnected from traditional means of communication. And so we've developed a text messaging tool, and there are multiple uses to this text messaging tool. We actually do a lot of work outside of census. We just wrapped up tax season, for instance, and we just did a big round of outreach for earned income tax credit. We sent messages out to over 300,000 people in the state of California to connect them to benefits. We also do follow-up surveys, sending information out, collecting data, and making sure people have what they need to be able to connect with the programs and services that are available to them. But we want to talk today about census. I'm assuming that all of you have joined here because you're aware of what's going on with the census, and also have been hearing bits and pieces about what libraries are expected to do really in ensuring a complete count. So we wanted to go over that. And then, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about some tools that we've developed using our mobile messaging platform, and also just our experience working with these communities to support libraries in their work. And then lastly, there's Q&A. So you'll see a questions box on the bottom right of your webinar screen. Feel free to chat those in throughout this conversation, and I'll try to get to as many of them as I could in the end. So most of you probably have seen this great guide that the American Library Association had put together for the census. And if not, I have it linked at the end of this presentation. We'll send it out in our follow-up email. But in addition to all the information that they provided just, in general about the census, the timeline, frequently asked questions, we wanted to draw attention to the section that pointed specifically to what libraries can do now to support that complete count and what they could do to prepare for that. So they listed 5 action steps for you all. One is participating in complete count committees. Now, most of the folks here in this call are in California, and California has a very interesting and powerful complete count setup where we have our state complete count committee based in Sacramento, and then there are regional complete count committees that are comprised of various nonprofit and government organizations. And then in some places, there are also county complete count committees and city complete count committees. So it really varies where you are, but chances are if you are in an area that is active on census outreach, because of the funding that the state has allocated for census, this funding has been coming down to complete count efforts in both cities, counties, and nonprofits. So definitely, if you're not a part of one already, I encourage you to go and reach out, find what your complete count committee looks like, and make sure that libraries are represented on there, given that you are, able to play such a significant role in the census. Second, the guide recommends preparing for an increased use of library computers and the internet. So as most of you should know, the census in 2020 is going to take place online. The questionnaire, everyone's going to be receiving a card in the mail that says, hey, the census is happening, here's your unique code, please go to this website and fill out the census there. And so given, especially in places like California, we have areas with a significant digital divide. There are people without access to computers, or even if they do have access to computers, they don't have access to the internet, or they could just not be used to using computers and not know how to get to the website for the census. So the state and the local counties and nonprofits are establishing a network of assistance centers across the geography, but they're also going to be looking to libraries to really play a role where people, if they're, the first thing that comes to mind when they think, I need someplace to access a computer and fill out the census, they're likely going to think libraries. And so knowing that, This guide recommends that libraries, especially during the actual census, which would take place from between March and July of 2020, to really prepare for that influx of people coming in, and also knowing what the process is for people filling out the census and making sure that there are supports in place for them. The third recommendation in the guide is really around census jobs. So because the census is online, but also because there are a number of factors that are potentially going to lead to an undercount. For instance, we have the potential addition of a citizenship question, which is currently being evaluated in the Supreme Court. But regardless of that question, the brand has sort of been damaged, and people just do not trust the government in a way where they would be voluntarily providing this information. So there are folks who are hesitant to participate in the census. The census had significant budget cuts over the past few years, and so things like field tests have been canceled. So, there are new technologies and processes in place where they, it's still untested, and they're attempting another test over the summer, but still there's just a lot left to figure out. Given all of that, the Census Bureau is anticipating that in the hardest to count communities, the self-response rate could be especially low. And what happens after a self-response is completed, the self-response period is completed, then that's when the Census Bureau sends enumerators out. So these are census takers. They're the folks who go and knock on doors, and they answer the questions about the census and also interview people in person. And so knowing that the census has to recruit over 50,000 people in the state of California to work as census workers, it's in really our community's best interest to help them source candidates who are reflecting the communities that they're counting, and to also make sure that they're speaking local languages. So again, the census job application is also online, and people are going to be looking to libraries as places where traditionally people go and apply for jobs, to apply for census jobs. So that's a third recommendation that the guide has presented. The fourth recommendation is around misinformation. So knowing what happens in these big democratic events, such as elections, census is another one of those. There are misinformation, disinformation, that all abounds, and we want to make sure that there is an ability to quickly identify them and to counter-inform them, to make sure that we're nipping them in the bud. So again, since people look to libraries as a source of information and a source of truth, what can libraries do to ensure that they're fighting this disinformation that's out there? The last recommendation that the guide has presented is to just provide information about the census, particularly to hard to count populations. So you could imagine, and this will probably take place throughout the entire census process, including now when people are starting to apply for jobs, and all the way through the online self-response rate, or even during the non-response follow-up when enumerators are knocking on doors. People are going to come to libraries. They might ask library staff, hey, what's going on? Is this the real thing? Do I have to participate? Do I have to answer all the questions? And you can imagine in places like California, these questions are coming in multiple languages. So the American Library Association has identified these 5 recommendations for preparing for the census. And the good news is that we have a year out to prepare, but it's a lot of work, especially when you're thinking about just training folks, getting all the resources. It's this pretty significant lift. So that's where our tools come in. And I wanted to share 2 of them in particular with you. We actually have a suite of 5 tools, and you could visit our website, censusoutreach.org, to learn about those. But we think the 2 that will really benefit you in the work, especially in the preparation that the ALA has recommended, is the following 2 here. So the first one is a help desk tool, and we've been thinking a lot about just how libraries and library staff especially are going to have enough capacity to answer all the questions that are coming in about the census. So this tool is, as you can see here on the left of the screen, it's a text messaging tool, but it is something that can also be available on computers. It could be integrated into web browsers. So you could see it as mobile messaging as broadly defined, not necessarily just text. But what this tool is basically a virtual assistant. And all that people need to do is ask it a question. It's anonymous, and they will receive an automated confidential response from a verified library of answers instantaneously. This could be done in multiple languages. So every region has a set of languages that they're required to provide services in. So we are working with different regions to provide different languages. What regions are also expected to do, and especially if they're receiving funding from the State Complete Count Committee, is to have a formal kiosk system. So places like the city of Los Angeles, for instance, potentially the city of San Jose, they're planning on having these kiosks where people can go and fill in the census. So you can imagine there's a web browser, a specific landing page. This chatbot can integrate into that and be available for if people are looking and starting to work on the census, then they could chat into the chatbot questions like, why does census want to know my race? Or what is the difference between Hispanic and Latino? This tool, like I mentioned, is also available via SMS, via Facebook Messenger. So if you're a library with a very active Facebook page, for instance, you could just advertise, hey, do you have a question about the census? Just send it via Facebook Messenger and we can respond. Or you could even have bulletins or posters around the library, or maybe when people are checking out their books, you could give them a little postcard or a flyer saying, hey, we are going to be a resource during the census. You could trust us to provide you answers that are grounded in truth. So if you have a question, whether it's in Spanish, Vietnamese, Tagalog, just text it here and you'll receive an answer. And our goal again for this is just to save all the time and resources that library staff would otherwise be putting in. There's a lot to know and learn about the census, and things are constantly changing. There are constantly updates. There are new announcements. And it's a huge lift to keep thousands of staff members informed and on board with all of it. So this tool is hoping to lift that burden and then also save staff capacity for the in-person interactions that really matter. Maybe there are questions that someone really needs help with. They could direct staff resources to that as opposed to questions like, can I fill out the census on paper? So this is what a little mock-up of what it would look like. You can imagine if all of your designated computers that are going to be used for census responses have a little browser up, then there's a little chat box. So we have a sample question here, what if I'm biracial? And then it provides an answer, and then it also verifies whether their question was answered in the first place. Like, did this satisfy what you need? And if there isn't, if the answer isn't resolved, then we could either have a ticket sent to a librarian. Maybe there's one staff person around who is trained to be able to answer those questions, or we could direct them to the census hotline. We could direct them to another local resource. That information is customizable. So I wanted to show you here a little look into the back end of what we're putting into this tool. So we received a sizable grant from Microsoft to begin training this using their platform. And as you could see, this is a question set that we're training particularly related to race questions. Now, a lot of organizations, and libraries included, are already putting together fact sheets and FAQs, but a lot of them pertain to, the census more in general. So for instance, like, what's going on with the citizenship question? Why is the census important? What we've been really focusing on is the actual user experience of completing the census. So people going through and wondering about, like, can you skip a question? Are all the questions required? What's the difference between this question and that question? We have put the census form in front of people, like actual humans, and we're asking them to provide us as many questions as possible that they have about it. And we're sourcing tens of thousands of questions from these folks, and we're grouping them and training our chatbot to be able to answer them automatically. So as you can see here, this one, we put the race question in front of people, and people have asked us, why do they need to know these demographics? Aren't we all created equal? Why is the government so concerned about my race? Why does race matter? Why do you need this information? And we are training it right now to be able to answer those questions from this verified library of answers. So again, it ensures consistent messaging. It ensures accurate information is being provided to people at all times. And again, we're training this in multiple languages. So that's our help desk tool, and we would love to see this available just on library computers across the state, across the country, just depending on how it will fit into the local complete count strategies. That's really the question at hand. So the other tool that I wanted to briefly mention to you is our tool designed to help people applying for census jobs. So this is another area that requires just a huge learning curve and lots of training. If you're interested, you could actually go and apply for a census job right now. The job application currently is open, and you'll be able to see that it's a long online process. It's an application for a government job. So, you could just think about what those types of applications entail. And, there's also just a long timeline where it's still a little unclear when follow-ups will happen, what the next steps are, what people need to prepare before they even apply in the first place. So we developed this tool, and we have actually worked with the Census Bureau on this one. We were part of an accelerator program, and we got feedback from their field operations leadership about how to make this tool as helpful as possible to folks on the ground who might be applying. So if you're thinking, job training participants, maybe they're adult education students, they would otherwise be going to a library staff member saying, how do I apply for a census job? How much does it pay? When are they going to interview me? What does the background check process look like? But instead, we created a virtual job application coach who could provide those answers instead. So it helps candidates determine if they're eligible to apply. You do need to be a U.S. citizen, 18 years or older right now, but historically the census has issued waivers for candidates who speak certain languages. So that is still to be determined. This tool, again, after it determines eligibility, it'll send resources. So a link to the census application, checklists on things that people need to make sure they have before they apply. For instance, their selective service number if they're a male candidate. We've created videos. They're little 2 to 3 minute videos in English and Spanish that walk them through the application and the process. And then also making sure that people have access to the actual census jobs hotline all in one place. After they complete their application, they actually receive nudges and follow-ups throughout the whole hiring process. I have personally applied for a census job to keep tabs on the process, and if I have time, I could potentially work. But as soon as I get a call for an interview, you could bet that everyone else is going to receive a text message saying, hey, the Census Bureau has started to call people about census jobs. So make sure you're checking your emails. This tool also integrates into kiosks. So you could imagine, even right now, since the census is hiring, you could have a little chatbot pop up saying, hey, do you want to learn about census jobs? They pay $30 an hour in the city of San Jose, for instance. Why don't you put in your zip code and let's get started. And again, this is all ultimately designed just to save time and resources for library staff. I was at a Complete Count meeting just on Monday, and people were talking about the huge lift required for librarians and other library workers, where they just have to learn about the census, they have to learn about the job application, they have to learn how to troubleshoot, they have to be constantly monitoring folks. So hopefully this will be helpful to them. So this is the recruitment timeline for you, and you could, when you receive this slide deck after this webinar finishes, you could study it. But the high-level overview is that the census is recruiting right now through a centralized online portal. If you apply once, you're considered for both address listers who will be working this summer into the fall, and then also for census takers, also known as enumerators, for next spring. So you could imagine if someone wants to apply for either position, they might be going to your library now. But the bulk of the applications they're anticipating is going to align with the bulk of the outreach work, which is going to happen this fall. So this is just an FYI for you, and as you're thinking about how to make sure you're staffing your libraries appropriately and making sure you have computers available. So that's really all the content that I had for you all. The key questions that I would say that I would ask you to think about as you're moving forward in your census work, and as I'm posing these questions to you, you could also pose questions to me, again, using the chat box on the bottom of right of your screen. The first question is, are you represented? Are your libraries represented in your local Complete Count committee? So again, look into your county, your city, or in some areas, it's a regional Complete Count committee. Make sure that knowing that they're anticipating, and even the ALA is recommending that libraries do play a significant role, you want to make sure that there are resources in place for you. So the strategic planning and budgeting processes for counties and what they're calling administrative community-based organizations are currently underway. So if you're not in those conversations, I would highly recommend that you just see what you could do to get into them and make sure, and this leads to my second question, do you have the resources, whether they're staffing, training, or technology, to support Complete Count efforts as an assistance center, knowing that at some point you might be called upon to play that role? So, again, that's answering questions about the census in multiple languages over this next year. It's supporting job applicants, and also it's countering misinformation. And we do have a tool for that too, but I don't want to talk about it here. So over the next week, really, given the current processes that are taking place right now for Complete Count committees, I would again urge you to look into making sure that you are represented, and also that, thinking about this whole scope of the work that's going to be involved in the next year, just knowing, asking if you have the resources available to support these efforts. And if you're interested in incorporating these tools into the work that you're doing, this is where your Complete Count Committee can help. So all of that said, here are some resources that we'll be sending you as a follow-up to this webinar. If you haven't checked already, the state of California has an official census website. They have a unique California campaign. It has resources available to you. It also has information about just what's going on with the funding for census. So if you're curious about what's happening in your county or in your region, it'll be clear to you when you visit that website how the funding has been allocated. And over this next year, as the state is going to be developing official outreach materials, all those materials will be available on this site and could be used as a resource for you. So I would bookmark that page and just keep checking back occasionally. I've also linked for you here the Census Field Job application. So for all field jobs and a number of other temporary jobs, you go to this 2020census.gov/jobs website. If you are interested, or if someone else is interested in a more office type job with the Federal Census Bureau, that has to go through USA Jobs. I'm sorry. So there are two different applications, but again, information about census jobs are on that website, and I encourage you, if you have some spare time, try and create a profile and put in an application yourself, just to see what the experience is like and what people might be going through when they're coming to you. And again, thinking about these hardest to count communities, we want to recruit people from these communities. What barriers might they have about in finishing that job application? Thirdly, I've linked for you here the ALA guide. It's a fantastic guide. It has a lot of really good information and FAQs for your library staff. So it's really worth just having available and referring to it. And the ALA has told me that they will be releasing additional content throughout this next year. So look out for that. And then lastly, if you want more information on our census tools, you could go to censusoutreach.org. Again, we're a nonprofit. We provide technology and training, and we're working with just a variety of folks depending on what works best for that region. Sometimes it's the county, sometimes it's a nonprofit. We could also work directly with libraries if needed. So you could contact us for more information and a quote. And again, I would point you to 3 of the tools that we have. The help desk, the field staff recruiter, and also a tool that I didn't mention, which is the misinformation reporter. So that's it. We have some questions that people have already submitted when they signed up for this webinar. So let me start by addressing those first. But in the meantime, please do put other questions that you might have into the chat box on the bottom right of your webinar screen, and I'll see if I could get to them. So one question that I received was, program ideas to bring hard to count and traditionally underrepresented communities to libraries and to participate. Now, gosh, that's a big, I could give a really long answer to that one. I would say that the best thing to do really would be to check with your Complete Count Committee, because chances are they are putting together strategies already that have sort of like a holistic regional approach. They've been doing some resource mapping. So for instance, they're mapping out all the different organizations that work in a certain place, the different languages or the populations that they serve, and they're asking themselves, are we covering everything? Are we reaching everyone? So chances are from that, then they're going to have some ideas of different types of programming and even potentially provide resources. So I would say, like in a large picture response, to check with your Complete Count Committee about that. What we've been hearing, it ranges from definitely marketing. So there's going to be a big marketing and outreach campaign in most places. They're going to have ads on buses or billboards or posted in community centers that talk about the census and also connect them to local resources if needed. There are going to be a lot of events. So the state has these branded Be Counted California events, where I could imagine, I think the format is pretty flexible, but people could do a census barbecue on April 1st, for instance. Bring your census card, fill out the form on one of these iPads, and get a free coffee or a slice of pizza or something like that. So there are lots of events that have traditionally worked. And the key to these events is just going to where these hard to count communities are, as opposed to bringing them out into a different location. So I'm sure there will be a lot more ideas that will be coming to form. And, again, if you want to have a say in what those look like, just get involved with your Complete Count Committee now. Another question that I received was, what do you recommend for training for library staff? So for that one, gosh, that's also a lot. There is a lot to learn about the census. So, I would encourage library staff or, a designated person to go to the California Complete Count website and see what resources are there available right now. And then from there, probably the most effective thing, we've put together guides and toolkits in the past, but what we found is most effective is actually just doing a lunch and learn, right? Like getting in front of people, making sure that they're able to ask questions live rather than just like reading through something. So I could imagine that for this ALA guide that comes out, it's probably worth an actual lunch and learn to talk through. Library staff need to know what the census timeline is, what the census form looks like, the process of the census, so knowing that cards are mailed out mid-March, knowing that there will be multiple mailings that go out, knowing that to go online, the census will be available in 12 languages, knowing that if the people do not participate online for the census, then they're going to be receiving a paper form in the mail, but knowing that also the paper form is available only in English and Spanish. Knowing that late April, the Census Bureau is going to start their non-response follow-up operation. So that means that there's an enumerator who might be going to someone's door. So knowing about that, knowing about how the citizenship question has come to land in the Supreme Court, knowing census job requirements, knowing the application timeline, what to do if people don't know their selective service number. I can imagine there will be some substantial training that will be required for library staff. If you're able to have, access to resources that bring our tools in, I think that would be a nice, easy way to navigate that. But otherwise, I would again go to your Complete Count committee and see if they're developing training materials for organizations, and hopefully you'll be able to take advantage of some of that. Let's see. I received a question here about technology requirements for libraries. That one, I want to acknowledge that I see that question, but I don't think I'm the best person to answer that right now. I think that the Census Bureau will probably the California State Complete Count Committee will also be issuing requirements if they haven't already, or recommendations, about what libraries and any other assistance centers should be doing if they want to use their computers as kiosks. I could imagine they involve making sure that they're connected to LAN lines for Wi-Fi or instead of Wi-Fi, or making sure maybe you're turning computers to face the wall so that people can't look over your shoulder and see what you're answering, things like that. Let's see. Another question, there's always a question that's asked about the citizenship question. So, I'll just briefly answer that by saying, again, it's currently being evaluated in the Supreme Court. We're not sure at this point in which direction it's going to go, but we do know that what we're trying to focus on is how to ensure a complete count despite that question. Knowing that either way, even if it's stricken from the census, people might still think it's on there, or and we could imagine also the issues that will arise if it does end up on the form. So that is still just to be determined. What I can say is that the census has also just recently released information about a new test that they're going to be doing this summer. This test will take place late summer. They're going to sample 500,000 households across the country, and they're going to oversample hardest to count households. Half of them are going to receive the census without the citizenship question, and half of them are going to receive the census with the citizenship question. So this test is designed specifically around the citizenship question. And as late as October of this year, I believe, they're going to release the results. And with those results, hopefully will be some recommendations and calls to action. It would be great if they say, great news, people will still participate in the census, and maybe because there was such active outreach throughout the summer already, knowing that we're less than 1 year out from the census right now, on why it's important to participate in the census, right? Coming down to money and power for your community, for instance. Or it could go completely the other way. You could say, wow, we anticipated at least a 60% self-response rate in this type of community. It looks like it's only going to be 40%, which means that enumerators are going to have to bring in 60% of the count unless we do some crazy more outreach. And then if that's the case, then now we're looking at having to recruit even more candidates. Right now in communities, we have estimates for how many enumerators your community will need to hire, and you could reach out and ask. We also know how much, if you can Google census job pay rates, and you'll be able to see how much they pay in your community. But right now, the Census Bureau is anticipating anywhere from a 5-to-1 to a 10-to-1 candidate to hire ratio. So, if the state of California needs to hire over 50,000 people across the state to work for census jobs, you can imagine then that means between now and next February, we need to get 225,000 people or more into the jobs pipeline. So this is a lot of it's going to be dependent on what happens with the citizenship question in the Supreme Court and also how this test goes this summer. So if are there any other questions that I could answer right now? And if not, I love these super short and efficient webinars, and I could give you back half an hour of your day. We could always do that too. Last call. All right. So thank you so much for your time again and for joining us. I hope that this was helpful and informative to you. My contact information is on this slide here, Stephanie@CommunityConnectLabs.com. And you could again go to our website, censusoutreach.org. Feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up questions, if you want to learn more about your tools, or if you want to learn about if we're having conversations already with your complete count committees. We're quite involved with a number of them. Feel free to send over an email. And as next steps, again, we'll send out this webinar recording and slides so you could have them as resources for you in your work. Thanks again and best of luck.